1 year alone on AR, VR. And this is on an entire platform. So I don't know. I think whenever you have something as tectonic as mobile or internet, it deserves a lot of investment. And yes, it's going to be messy. And yes, Chamath's right. The cost of capital, frankly, is limiting the amount of money going into these businesses already. So we see a lot of dry powder sitting on the sideline that's chasing new ideas. I think one way to frame it as well is like, think about in 2000. We all knew that the internet was going to be big. We may have been lucky enough to conclude that search was going to be big. But if you invested in Yahoo or InfoSeek or AOL or Excite,
Lycos,
you tore all that money went to zero, right? So now think about just these large language models, right? The foundation models which are driving and enabling all of it, OpenAI. You've got OpenAI, you got Anthropic, you got Cohere, you got Character, you got Stability, you've got Lambda. It is almost impossible to know with any certainty, much like it was with the search engines in 99, 2000, who's going to emerge, where the value capture is going to be. It may all end up with Microsoft and Google. I mean, this may end up looking like iOS and Android at the foundation model level. And so, I think as investors, for example, on the foundation model side, I think it's very difficult to choose just one, particularly when the largest one is frankly captive and a proxy to Microsoft, and they're capping your upside return. So those are difficult investment decisions. That doesn't detract from the fact that I think it is as big as Doug suggests. And I do think there are going to be applications and tooling layer to come out of this that's going to produce really big winners. I would say that we are spending an extraordinary amount of time in this space. We haven't made a lot of investments. I think you have to study, you have to get deep. I mean, Chamath certainly and I have been investing in this space for at least a decade, maybe 15 years. But don't underestimate that the transformer model really did change the game here. And we're now producing impacts much larger.
Sachs, last week you said Web3 and crypto didn't kind of stick with you. You didn't see the use cases. And you, in the first inning here, or first at bat, you rattled off 3 or 4 really compelling use cases, from summaries to, the assistant guide on your side concept. Is this akin, in your mind, because Brad just said it could be bigger than mobile, internet, mobile, AI revolution? If you were to look at those 3, do you think it's bigger than actually mobile? And then we'll get into return profiles of 6.5% on cash versus what our VC is going to be able to do in this kind of market.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with Brad and Doug that this is the next big platform shift, whether it's as big as mobile or it's more like social or cloud. I mean, those have been the big platform shifts over the last decade or two. And I think this is definitely on par with those. I think Brad's right. We don't know where the value capture is going to be. Maybe it just all ends up accreting to the big companies who can make massive investments in this space. One difference between the internet ecosystem today and 20 years ago is you do have these giant companies who are not totally incompetent, right? I mean, they do have lots of talented engineers. And, 20 years ago, you'd have the big companies would just sit on their hands in the face of a platform shift, and they'd just be sitting ducks who get disrupted. That's not going to happen today. That being said, I do think that any new platform shifts creates opportunities for startups. And it may not be efficient the way that these opportunities get pursued, in the sense that, yeah, Doug's right that there's going to be a lot of spray and pray. But I think that it is kind of efficient for the ecosystem as a whole, right? Because like any smart engineer with a half decent idea ends up getting funded. And out of all of that, you get kind of a Precambrian explosion where, the ecosystem evolves a lot of different types of businesses. Most of them don't work. They get wiped out. They go extinct, but there'll be some good things that get funded. So we're more like, I think, Doug, in how we see it. We don't want to spray and pray. We want to be very selective. We want to put more money behind fewer opportunities that we think are better. And Doug Leone, I think he generally gives good advice of the tough love variety. And this is of a piece with that. And so I agree with him. That being said, there is a certain value to the ecosystem and having all these seed funds to spray and pray, right? Because it just it plants a lot of flowers, and then you see what blooms.
I would say, to build on that, Sachs, this is a perfect inefficiency when you see it from the outside, you're like, well, this is super inefficient. Why so many companies? If you free your mind and just say they're experiments, 2 or 3 person experiments, 500K to $1.5 million in that first stage when I invest right before you do, when you do your Series A's at 5 or 10 million. Milestone based funding is back in the tech industry. And that was something, Chamath, that we lost for a little while there. People would just come out and they would raise a Series B out of the gate. No product market fit, et cetera. Now what we're seeing is people are raising that 12 to 18 months. They got their backs up against the wall. Speaking of tough love, which you referenced, Sachs, that tough love of, hey, you have to hit the next milestone. What did you accomplish with the 1.5 million in order to get the 10 million, in order to get the 30 million? That 500 is going to go 10x. There'll be 5,000 of these startups, but it'll quickly whittle down, wouldn't it, Chamath, as people go through this milestone-based funding system in Silicon Valley?
We haven't given enough time for a logical framework of investing to develop, which also is tied to a logical framework for entrepreneurship to emerge. We're just way, way, way too early. So the thing with all of these language models is that they are grist for the mill. And we talked about this before. If it was a highly proprietary asset, you would have never sold 49% of it to Microsoft for $10 billion because you would assume that it was worth $1 trillion. So it's a huge tell on the part of OpenAI, their deep understanding, and they understand it better than anybody else, that it's a bit of a capped upside. So what is uncapped, I guess, is maybe the better question. Well, if you look at the 1849 gold rush as an example, the people panning for gold, in my opinion, are the people building language models today. They're going to come and they're going to go. But who's going to win? Well, the pick and shovel providers won. Levi Strauss won. So what is the equivalent of that today? I think it's at the silicon layer, because you need to really re-architect how compute will actually work in a world of all of these models. Those folks will get paid. If you look at AMD and NVIDIA, they've been getting paid for years. They continue to get paid. They probably will continue to get paid even more. And so folks that actually take a step into doing something hard and difficult in AI, like custom silicon, could get rewarded. And then there's what I call the white truffles. What are these unique Alba white truffles? These singular sources of data that, when used in reinforcement learning, make your output just zing. And that's where I think Facebook is an obvious white truffle. Quora is a white truffle, but there are a lot of startups that could become white truffles if they gather enough data. And that's like a pretty reasonable framework. And so in that framework, if you apply it to today, there's way few silicon startups and there's way few white truffles. Instead, it's everything is the bologna